Hello and welcome to episode 8 of Jermyn Street Theatre's Prompt Corner. Today we're talking about set design and we've got some wonderful guests. We have Louie Whitemore, who is Associate Designer at Jermyn Street Theatre. We have Neil Irish, who designed the set for The Tempest, which started running at Jermyn Street Theatre before we closed down, and Ceci, who designed the set at Jermyn Street Theatre for 1 Million Tiny Plays About Britain. It's a lovely chat, so do enjoy. Shall we start with Louie? Would you like to start?
Sure. My name's Louie Whitemore. I'm a freelance set and costume designer. I started out backstage doing technical things, sort of stage management, company management, production management, and slightly stumbled into design. Ended up going to the amazing Motley theatre design course and have been working as a freelance set and costume designer for dance, theatre and opera for the last 15 years. I'm also the associate designer to Jermyn Street Theatre, which means I help them out with some of the things which you are currently seeing online at the moment.
Awesome, very good. And you, Ceci?
Hello, I'm Ceci and I'm a freelance set and costume designer as well. I graduated from Royal Welsh almost 3 years ago now, so I guess I'm a recent graduate. I've been since graduating I've been working as a designer and assisting designers as well. That's me.
And you, Neil?
Hi, I'm Neil Irish. I've been designing for about 20 years, I think now. Set, costume, props, so the full production design, not just specifically set design. So I did fine art, and then I changed to stage design at Birmingham. So I did a degree at Birmingham back in the day. I did some work experience while I was at college. I did some work experience at the BBC. And bizarrely from that, they offered me a job when I graduated on the proviso I improved my drafting and technical drawing skills. So I worked in the set department for about 2 years as an assistant designer, sort of lowest of the low, and didn't really progress with my technical drawing, so moved to costume design, into BBC costume design. Went off television, came out, did a bit of theatre work in the Midlands, and then decided to try and get down to London, and I did a postgraduate at the Slade at UCL. So I did that for 2 years, and that opened a few doors, into the sort of southeast theatre scene. And with things like the Limbury, that opened some other doors, and that's how I started really doing set costume props. Never went back to TV. I mean, I quite like it now. I mean, I'm quite a good draftsman, and so I've still got the same fears with CAD now that I had with drafting back in the day. So
I thought if we focus our chat about set design today, although all of you are very that multifaceted sort of design. But I thought I might start by asking quite a broad question that would be, how would you characterise your mission or your task when you start to set design a play?
I would say that my job as a designer is to tell the story that is in the text. So if I were dealing with a play, I should be trying to find the best way to tell that particular story. If I'm doing something that doesn't connect to that story, then I'm not doing my job right.
Yeah, I think our job is to tell the story as clearly as possible, but in different and unusual different ways. But I think once our job starts to distract from that, then we're not doing our job, and we're perhaps being a bit indulgent or whatever. But I think it's just the clarity of storytelling. That's why we're there, and whatever we do should enhance that, and even enhance the characters and storytelling.
Yeah, definitely.
With this interesting aesthetics.
Yeah, definitely, and creating the atmosphere as well, and sort of focusing down the audience's vision
and so that idea of a story, that idea of like an atmosphere, something that seems quite materially intangible, where do you begin with in your processes? How do you pin that down, basically? Is it by starting looking at a script? Is it by starting looking at kind of the emotions that you see at play within like a team of people that are working towards like a production? Or
I think for me, it's the overall. It's not just the actual script. Although obviously that's that's the first point, but it's also the brief for the project. What is the project about? Is it just one venue? Is it a tour? I think all those things inform the final design. But obviously the main thing is the script and the venue. And the script, then research into the script, and then obviously discussions with the director. That's the sort of start point.
And every production is different as well. I think it completely depends on who you're working with as well. And I like to sort of create a relationship with the director and start a conversation. And I think sometimes your process changes with whoever it is that you're working with. And I think, that relationship is really important to, and for you to both have the same sort of language, so that you're both achieving the same overall vision and style and everything.
Exactly, because I think it's whichever director you're working with. Because I mean, some projects you go to the first meeting and the director might, come with a load of books and visuals, and sometimes your heart sinks because you think, actually, we haven't had that initial discussion yet. Or sometimes the director might come with a set design from his notebook, or her notebook, and your heart sort of sinks then as well. But then on the other hand, at the other extreme to that is a director that has got absolute no visual understanding, or who just lets you, that kind of mentality that you're the designer, so I'll trust you, just get on with it. So I think the sort of person I like is the one that's in the middle of, halfway between, where you've got some leeway, and so I think that's the starting point. But I also think the venues as well. I mean, I think it's getting getting to know which venue you're in, just technically, but the boring things.
I was just going to say that relationship that Neil and Ceci are talking about is one of the bits I really love about the job, and the variant between the jobs, because every relationship is different with every director or choreographer. And I love the same as Neil, I sort of hate turning up for a meeting and they've already got a set design.
but sometimes good if you've got no idea, if you've got
exactly, you can play both sides, but part of the joy is the challenge of negotiating that collaboration with the other person. You're never working in total isolation. I really like that bit of the job.
Yeah, it is it's a team sport.
Yeah.
And I'm not just the director, but I think obviously the initial meetings are with the director, but then further, as soon as possible, you should be, talking to the lighting designer. If there's projection, possibly, if we've decided, all those people need to come in as early as possible, really. If that happens, really late down the track, I think that's when a lot of, things go wrong.
And I think as a designer as well, you spend so much time, well, I do anyway, but by yourself as well, in your studio and really in your mind and trying to get things out and it, exactly bringing having those conversations and talking to as many people as possible really opens up your creativity, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think that's getting less, because at the moment everybody, I mean, before, speaking about, before this crisis, but everybody was so busy, it was hard to have, to get everybody, I don't know whether you two found that, but to get everybody involved in the same room, almost impossible. I mean, I've done projects where I've only met the lighting designer on the first day of rehearsals, and that happens a lot now.
I would agree with Neil, but I think it's because, maybe a controversial statement, we don't get paid enough. And so you're never able to do one job at any one time, and everybody is doing that. Lighting designers, sound designers, projectionists, everybody's having to double up. Yeah. So everybody having to negotiate diaries in order to make ends meet. And therefore, you find that you're not able to have those early key stage meetings. Now, the weird thing is that if you did have those early meetings, you wouldn't have the mistakes that happen later, which means you'd save money.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
nobody seems to be connecting those dots.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
That also, sorry, that does include directors as well.
Yeah, yeah, it involves everybody, the whole sector.
Sometimes you can get a meeting with the director, but they've got, because I mean, they're terribly, they're busy like, but you might get an hour, and you just think, actually, if we could have had the whole afternoon and thrashed this out. I mean, that does sometimes, but a lot of the time it's just, I've got an hour between this and that, and or an hour for lunch when they're rehearsing. I mean, that happens a lot now. And you just feel sometimes it would be nice to, especially if you've got to move on, and take the process further. You might need more time than that. Moan.
Well, I imagine they have the same frustration, because I imagine they would love to get their head into one project and really do it, and then not be dashing in and out of rehearsals. But fundamentally, those conversations, as everybody's saying,
and it is the best feeling when those conversations just go on and on and on. You just have more and more ideas going back and forth, and it's a luxury to have that time.
Yeah.
So Neil, you mentioned that you went back to do that postgraduate at the Slade, and Ceci, did you do a foundation year at the Royal Drawing School?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So I'd be interested, like, so talking about kind of process, where that comes into it, where does kind of, when you've got this relationship with the other people in the room, where does that moment come where you go, okay, right, I need to go and do my own thing, I need to work on my sketching, and how much does, I'd be interested to hear from all of you, how much does that like practical art feed into like your design as a whole? Because I mean, there are so many aspects to it, right, all the way through to building at the end, and the painting that comes with that, and all of that collaboration with the other designers on the project.
Well, I think are you talking like about the sort of 2D work? I think that happens, you can either go to the first sort of few meetings with a few rough sketches, and then, I mean, personally, I try and get into 3D as soon as possible. So, I mean, you can offer up some ideas in two-dimensional form, which is what I do, and then try and get into 3D and, get into space as soon as possible, really. I don't know how the other two...
I'm the same as Neil, primarily because I work much quicker 3D than I do sketching. I didn't do art at school. I didn't do art at secondary school at all, and then I never carried it on. So I've always been much quicker ripping up bits of card and chucking it in a model. Also, I know my brain just works better in 3D. I can see a space much quicker than if I was sketching it on 2D, but I think every designer has their own version.
I mean, I kind of start with I obviously read the text as much as possible, and I think the first couple of times I read it, I don't do any sketching or I mean, I might make a few notes, but it's only really until I've met with the director and then read it a few more times again, and then I start sketching. And I think having so I enjoy sketching along with the director talking as well, like during our meetings. I think that's actually quite a recent thing that I've started doing for some reason. I think at university I was taught a certain process, and I've only recently started sort of adding in my own style here and there, which is really a bit liberating and great. And it's the same with the model box. So I'd like to get the model box, the theatre box itself, built as soon as possible, and then bring that along to any meetings and work on the in the box with the director is really helpful, just to help them visualize the space, because I find it hard to explain my designs, and the director finds it hard to sort of visualize the design. So I think it's good to have a 3D thing there. Yeah.
And also, I think in the process, this is a bit boring, but if it's a venue that you don't know, then almost before you do anything really, you should, go visit the venue. And you tend to do that, and you travel up, and sort of like the assistant production manager might show you around for half an hour, but then I think you need to walk the stage, you need to sit out in the auditorium, look at the sight line. I mean, that's the big thing, the sight lines. Go up into the circle. You've just got to kind of feel the space, especially if it's somewhere that you don't, you've never worked at before. So I think that's sort of boring but vital, really.
Definitely.
And I'd be interested to know, so Louie, you say you came from that sort of behind the scenes background, starting with like the backstage stuff, starting with that sort of stage management kind of side of it. How do you think that's changed your process throughout the years? What's that done to it?
And certainly initially when I was starting out, it was invaluable because I knew how to make stuff. I knew how to make props and paint scenes, do scenic finishes and all of that. Because starting out, you are invariably sort of working on fringe shows and you're having to do a lot of this stuff yourself or help out another member of staff, like a production manager. So that was really, really good. I think latterly, because the industry has changed, I think a lot of producers wanted to know that a design is going to work. So turning up with a wonderful drawing, although that is a beautiful thing, it doesn't wash anymore. They sort of need to know that you have thought about the technical side of it. And to some extent, I haven't had to learn quite so much of that. You learn stuff all the time because the technology is changing all the time, but that's been really good. It has also sometimes been a bad thing because I will sometimes discount an idea I've had because I know it's technically challenging and might cost a bit of money, etc., etc. And I know that sometimes I have to sort of work against that in my own head. So there's a lot of conversations going on there.
Is that a balance that you guys have to strike as well, that balance between the creativity and the technical thing? Presumably that's constant.
Well, I mean, I'm quite good at painting and, prop making, but actual kind of engineering and the bigger thing, you kind of, I kind of rely on a good sort of production. I mean, not rely on, but, hopefully you've got a good production manager that will be all over that. But obviously you've got responsibility for it as well. So, if I'm told something's not possible, I kind of have to believe it really, or look into it further. But I think it's quite good not to be too technical because, like Louie was saying, then you can then you haven't got any kind of restraints, whether they're self-imposed or not. And then, the technical people and the builders, obviously someone has to end up building it. You kind of rely on them for the engineering and come into the process and make it work. I mean, as long as your ideas aren't too ludicrous. I mean, you don't sort of and safe. So
yeah. Sometimes I in the design process, I sort of you almost have to get to a point where you've over designed it and gone too far, and then you have to, and then it's almost too much, and then you realize just take that back, and almost go back to the beginning, and then you realize what the essence is of that design, and what it is that you should take from that and what you should disregard. But also I actually, just before lockdown, the last show that I did was the first time that I hired a set builder. So yeah, I've been building all my own sets, which is pretty challenging. So I've been and that's hard as well, because I did find myself designing sets that I knew I could build, which was really hard. But I mean, I definitely learned so much from that. But it does feel great to employ someone to do that in an actual workshop and not in my kitchen with my dad.
I still thrill when I'm able to design something knowing that I don't have to paint it. I'm like, someone is going to make this look so good because I don't have to paint it.
Yeah.
Your point's good about the sort of self-editing. That's good. You
Yeah.
know, because more sometimes, and sometimes it's imposed because it goes off to be costed and it's way over budget. So you have to do that. But sometimes it's good just to do that aesthetically, to sort of edit yourself and just say, is that peripheral? Is that too much? I mean, sometimes to do too much, but if it's not required, then it's good to have that ability to edit out.
And I'd be interested to know where you all got your references from, basically. So we're obviously in a period now where it's kind of difficult to go and see theatre, but is that normally a site for you guys to all like bounce off creative ideas? Is that somewhere where you gain a lot of inspiration from, or is it mainly from books, or is it mainly from other literature, or do you find yourself actually very focused in on the task when you're involved in a theatrical process?
I'm fascinated by designers that, as a first port of call, Google other designs of a show, because my brain cannot handle that at all. I need to never see any version of this show ever. And even until the show is on, I can't look. I just can't do it. But I've got colleagues that, they do, and that's what they do, and that's fine. I obviously can't do it at the minute. I always go to a library, because you can go to a library and just go to the sculpture section, not know what you're looking for, flick through something, and I've never not found something that has led to the design if I don't have an idea in my head already. If you use solely the internet, you have to have some sort of search term to start the process, so you're already restricting yourself. So obviously I research stuff that is specific online. Once I know like a particular period of costume or something, like a particular chair that's in a script, that might lead me down a way. But I always try and keep it quite vague and go to a library. We should all support our local libraries.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm always, what's that library? Is it the London Library?
London Library and Westminster Reference Library off Leicester Square.
That's the one I like. The staff is brilliant. Yeah, that's fantastic, that library. That's where I always go.
Yeah, it's because you can just go to the art section, the photography section, sculpture section, costume section, whatever, and just flick through books, and you always find something that, and you don't even know necessarily when you see the image what it relates to. Then you go home, it's in your head, and you're looking at the model box, and then you go, why don't we try this? And then that leads you down the path. So I think it's essential to be broad with your. And
if there's a reference to a period or a building, or go and visit these places of the period, and you're so right, not just to sit on the net. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I once made the mistake of I can't remember what it was that I was doing, but I remember I watched a film that was about that time, and I got some costume references or something from it, and then another designer said to me, no, that's completely wrong. That's the film designer had got it completely wrong. So I'd copied that, and it was awful. It was so bad. But yeah, no, I agree with Lou. I do. I go with I look at sculpture and I look at architecture as well. I really enjoy looking at the figure in space as well. I think seeing a big mass of something that fills a space is quite interesting. And I always start off with a big sort of one image that's this big grand motif or something, and then break it down. And,
but also there's like DNA, which is great for costume, or just going the plaster rooms, and just to get a sense of scale, all that. It's all there. I mean, in London and all our cities, there's inspiration everywhere without going.
Definitely, and as you say, they're in all our cities. It's not just to London. There are so many amazing museums around the country, and also if you're doing a modern play and it's set in some like a council estate or in the city or something, just go and sit with a cup of coffee in the area, you'll get all the costume research you ever need.
Yeah, take your camera. Yeah, you've got to get.
Yeah.
I read a really good article recently about note taking, and it was like quite literature focused. So it was about an academic who was kind of his note taking sort of processes and systems to kind of, in order that he might write his academic books in the future, sort of thing. Do you guys have any particular, talking about this sort of research that in some ways might be production specific, or it might be more broad? Is there a particular way that you find yourself organising visual and written references, or like what's? I mean, we were speaking briefly before we started the podcast about where we were about our little spaces, in some of your cases, little sheds, and what is the way that is that important to you, the space that you work in and that you design in?
Yeah, in my damp shed, I've got quite a lot of sketch. I mean, I usually get a sketchbook for each project, or they're not so exotic as they were, but notes in the back and references, visuals in the front. That's how I do it. I just do it. I don't do it on the computer or anything. It's just glue and scissors and notes, really. So if I go to a library and also I'll go to a library not just for visuals, but to research the playwright. If it's Shakespeare, read up about that. And again, in the London libraries, there's and it's just certainly in Birmingham where I go back to a lot. There's Shakespeare library there. And then, so it's basically just low-tech note-taking and a sort of montage of visuals to show.
I often, I do the same. It's a sketchbook for every show. I have a particular sketchbook I like to use, but it's not the end of the world. For some reason, I can't use pure white paper. It has to be off-white. Apparently, I'm told it's something to do with, I was dyslexic as a kid, and it's to do with how your eyes take light. If I see a couple of one or two images, like Ceci was saying about having one image that feels like it's a motif, I'll print it and I'll put it up on the wall so that it's sort of always there, and one hopes by osmosis it will turn itself into a good enough set design. But I think that's probably the only thing that I do that's different to
off-white.
It's just off-white, but no, just off-white. It's really, I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
weird.
I'm quite funny about my writing notebooks. It has to be dotted rather than plain. But I don't know, there's something about having that structure. It's quite nice.
Mine is squared, and I could do an entire podcast on what creators use as notepads. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and they all have to be a different colour as well. So at the moment I'm on orange, which is bright and jolly. But yeah, I'm. It's mainly for me. It's a lot of writing. I really, even though I did an art foundation and I love sculpture and things, I write a lot. I just always take notes, and then do a little sketch in the corner or something. But and then obviously when the design progresses, then I start drawing and collaging. I really enjoy collaging.
Yeah. And also, further down the track, you might start, storyboarding, rough storyboarding. I tend to do that in the book. So there's quite a lot of things going on that are relevant to the production in the book.
I think the collaging is a really good point, because I was told by a teacher at university that I could never be a designer because I couldn't draw, which so far I've managed to prove him wrong a little bit. And it's not actually about being a great drawer, it's just how you communicate your ideas, and you can do that in whatever way. We've just 5 or 6 ways you can do it, so I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Or I think they call them now like mood boards.
Yes.
Yeah. Doing something that's all about mood boards, which were electronic, but in my day were just things cut out, stuck on a bit of paper.
Yeah.
But they're another way of communicating. Big mood boards, just getting into the director.
Yeah.
Just showing visuals.
even if you show some images and they hate the images, that is as useful as the image.
Yeah.
Because and sometimes they don't know why, sometimes I don't know why, but if they hate an image, then that rules out a whole massive section of stuff. So even if you don't get all the images right, it's like being a detective. It's sort of, you know, finding a way.
Yeah, because a lot of directors don't really know what they want, but they have an image in their head, or they have a thought, and you're sort of sometimes supposed to just run with that thought, and exactly, you've got to sort of you've got to work out what they like and what they don't like, because sometimes they don't even know themselves, really.
Yeah.
And me too.
Idea, and then they're a bit and ahhry about it, like an initial response that you've had to it. And then you go around, you know, you kind of do a lot of other stuff and other scenarios, and then you kind of, I mean, not all the time, but a lot of the time you come back to your first, you know, what your first kind of reaction to whatever it is. You know, which I think is a good thing, that, you know, something that your first reaction to it sort of stuck, really. Your first response, I suppose. The early, I mean, not always, but those kind of instinctive first thoughts about a piece or a libretto or whatever. I think whatever you've had, that always comes through in the end. It's not very often that part of that's not there at the end on stage.
Definitely. This is the first studio I've ever had.
That's so cool.
Like, yeah, and so I've had it 2 years.
Yeah.
I've always been like a desk in my room, and I've had to like move stuff over onto my bed to go to sleep. Yeah. Do
you find, like, is it such a difference having an actual space to, like, just like compartmentalize and stuff? Is that like?
Yeah. I mean, I come in here a lot, but it's good that you can hide it.
Is that a big thing? Do you find, because it's a creative process, that your mind can constantly be worrying about things? Do you find that you have to kind of turn off from it, or is that something that you enjoy about it, that it's so immersive?
Weirdly, I can't read scripts in my studio because there's too much fun stuff around. Rather be like, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that. So I always read scripts for the first time in a coffee shop, and then after I've read it once, I can read it anywhere. I don't. Again, it's like the weird off-white paper. Apparently, that's another thing.
I tend to read scripts on trains.
Nice, yeah.
And that's quite a good, you know. I can seem to concentrate on trains, bizarrely. Or in the shed. I mean, I do it you know, it hasn't got to be a moving thing.
Yeah.
But I don't get too distracted. All I've got in here is the radio. That's a bit of a distraction. So it is quite, you know, it's a place to focus down. Apart from the agricultural vehicles going past, everything falls off the shelves.
Yeah, I've sort of learnt to read a script anywhere. I think because when I first started, I was working a lot in Cardiff, and so I would be getting like a mega bus up to Cardiff, so, or across to Cardiff, megabus actually is quite nice to read a script on.
It's fascinating to hear you all speak about design in a way that I hadn't heard it spoken about before, in terms of like putting so much focus on that communicating of ideas, and the fact that the process seems to revolve, correct me if I'm wrong, but seems to have quite like a heavy focus on ensuring that the things that you do facilitate like communication between you and like the director or other members of the team, and that it's much less about having an idea and trying to pull your idea through to completion.
Well, I mean, hopefully most projects have an idea and you want to promote that. I mean, sometimes it gets along the way. But really, with the set, you are just working with the director. I mean, that's what I like about costume design as well, is that you actually, you know, you're working with the actors. You know, that's much closer. You know, I quite like that input, that you're working together on that. So, it's the same with that. You don't kind of impose, it evolves, and you come to that conclusion together. So I think I've never gone to a project and said this is the set, take it or leave it. It kind of evolves. I mean, that's the process, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some directors, like I said earlier, that let you kind of go with your own instincts more, which is fine. But if that works at the end, where they sort of say, "What the hell's that?"
Yeah.
Have you ever had that happen?
A couple of times, well, not so much the whole design, but just things like, I thought there was going to be, another platform there, you go to a final run through of something, and this has happened where there's people been coming on like downstage left, like every other entrance, and you kind of go, do they remember that we cut the downstage left end?
It's so true. It's so true. That moment in a run through where you're just like, oh my, did you look at the model box? Did you look at the technical drawing?
Yeah, you're walking through a wall right now.
I mean, now I insist. I think everybody does it. That in the rehearsal room there are pictures of the model and a ground plan. So there's just whoever's in the room on the stage management side, that they're completely au fait with every entrance and what's going to be coming in next. So
yeah.
And that's what, like I said before, it's a team sport, so everybody needs to be up to speed on what the design is, proved it and had their input. So nobody's got any surprises when we get back.
There's always a moment.
There's always a surprise.
There's always one.
Oh, it's red, is it? It's going to be red. It's always going to be red. That type of red.
Yeah, it's the same as the drawing on the wall over there.
Same as the model. Well, it's ish like.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Prompt Corner. Next week we're talking to assistant directors, which should be really exciting. So do tune in. If you don't already subscribe to our YouTube channel, make sure you do that. And like and follow all of our social media channels. Hopefully see you next week.